Hi there, it's Brian Sebastian, Movie Reviews and More, Worldwide Entertainment, Women on TV.tv, iTube 247 out of Franklin, Tennessee. So I've been looking forward to this show. First of all right, Mike, so who are you? Where are you coming from?
My name's Mike Anthony. I'm an author, actor, and bartender. That's one of my books there, Love Dad, How My Father Died, Then Told Me He Didn't. And I'm coming to you today from Connecticut.
Yes, so I grew up in Connecticut. I don't know if you knew that or not, did you?
I did not know. Where?
East Lyme, Connecticut.
Fantastic.
I started in New London, Waterford, and then I graduated from an all-white high school in East Lyme, Connecticut, a town of 7,000. We were only 3 Black families in the 70s.
Oh, man, was that weird?
No, because I'm still friends with a lot of my people that I went to school with till this day, because I was in the band, if that makes sense. So I was that drummer. You know, us drummers bang harder, so we have to create a bunch of noise and things like that.
Right.
It was very interesting. I'm honored to be from there. And I was like, oh, I get to talk to someone from Connecticut. It's been a while.
I'm so glad. Where are you now?
I'm in Las Vegas right now, but
okay.
Between Vegas and Los Angeles.
Gotcha.
Our studio is in Los Angeles. We have one here in Vegas, but I like the one in Los Angeles because it's built specifically for us for what we're doing. But
gotcha.
This is really good. I've been looking forward to this, and thank you. I'm not sure if you sent these books. Like I said, I love this book. Talk about this one first and why this is important to you, because there's a couple things in there, and I have a shaman. So I'll tell you, you could probably understand where I might be coming from. I understand a lot of how you wrote this because I understand what I went through. And my dad is still here, but I have messages come to me from my old co-host, a grandmother, and my partner's mother. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a shaman, then you're deep into this personally. You know this stuff on a personal level. For me, after my dad passed, which was in 2011, it was a completely shattering event. My dad was this amazing man, the center of our family. Completely out of nowhere, he died. And like the idea of life after death had always been something that had been in the back of my mind. Obviously, you know, death is something that affects every single person on the planet. But I'd also always loved science. And, you know, the mainstream scientific paradigm says that when you die, period, the end, that's it. You know, the brain stops getting oxygen, the illusion of self, which is what the mainstream scientists tell us it is, an illusion, that thing goes away forever. And before I became an actor and you know, started writing these books, I had initially planned on being a high school science teacher. So science had always been a part of my life, and those scientific edicts were crushing me after my dad died. The idea that this wonderful, amazing man, that everything that he ever was, all of his love and joy and ideas could disappear like that, then I couldn't figure out what the point to living was. You know, what's the point of anything if he could be gone? And I was in my family and I were in that state of despair when, out of the blue, mediumship, the idea that there are people on the planet who can communicate with our deceased loved ones, that crashed into our lives.
Talk about this, because there's a thing where you have in there where a medium reaches out to call you. And I said, well, I've never had that one happen before. That's got to be pretty cool. But at the same time, where are you coming from? Strange. And then the second thing is, I've had my shaman, Joya Delaney, she's known as the Beverly Hills Shaman, since October of 1993. She told me many things. So as I'm reading what you were being told, I was like, wow, these are flashbacks of what she was telling me, because my reading was 2.5 hours. And today, that's changed everything of what I was doing. And she told me, Brian, if you had gotten all this stuff at an earlier age, you'd be married with 2.3 kids and you'd be divorced twice. I said, that makes sense. So since then, I've never been married and I don't have any kids, because I understood where she was telling me, being in the world of entertainment. Talk about that phone call. Oh, and the other thing is, real quick, is I had 2 people. One person, his name is Eric Zilli, goes, I don't know who you are, but God said I need to stop and talk to you. I said, oh, okay. We're friends till this day. And then I understand why that happened now. The other person, I don't understand this one yet. It hasn't happened yet, I guess. She goes, God told me I needed to call you and check in with you. So she's a medium, and we've had one conversation. and one lunch, and then we're still working on things. I'm having a hard time getting a hold of her, but I want to know, so if God told you to call me, how come you're not following up? Go ahead, Mike.
And that's a fair question. Yeah, for most people, mediumship comes into their lives because they seek it out, right? In most cases, people are in a state of deep grief and they reach out to a medium in the hopes that there's something genuine going on there, that there really is something to the idea of mediumship, and they seek it out. In our case, a complete stranger, a woman that my dad had never met, that we had never met, got into contact with us saying that she had this guy named Robert, which is my dad's name, tapping her on the shoulder, and he was not going to stop until he delivered the message to his family that he had survived his death and that he was okay. And he needed to let them know that. So through this crazy series of events, this phone call came into my mom's house saying that there's a medium trying to get in touch with you guys.
Well, now, so I know how she reached you, but I'm like, it goes back into the thing where, of course, you told her how to reach you. I mean, just the thought of that doesn't sound, actually, I'm looking at it from the scientist's point of view now, that doesn't make any sense from the scientist's point of view.
No, it makes no sense whatsoever. But when you're in that state of grief, you'll grab for anything, right? You'll latch onto anything. And that's what happened when this call came in. As hard as it was to believe, I certainly wanted to believe it. But the scientific part of me was not going to let me have this thing unless I really got to the bottom of it. And it ended up kicking off this whole new unexpected journey in my life where I really started to investigate this stuff to try to see if this could possibly be a real phenomenon. Because I was sure that if this was real, if there are people walking around the planet who can connect with dead people, certainly one of my biology professors would have told me about that, right? Like, certainly I would have been made aware right after learning about mitosis in high school biology that, oh, and by the way, one of the other abilities of some brains is the ability to connect with consciousness that's no longer confined to a body. I certainly would have heard about it if it was real. But then when these things started to happen, and I started to investigate it on my own, basically by testing a medium, I tested her by sitting her down in front of a camera and then walking total strangers in to see her. Complete strangers that there was no way she could possibly know. She had no foreknowledge of them. So there was no time for her to do any Googling or hiring private detectives to follow them. Complete strangers. Walk them in, pressed record on the camera, and had her start giving readings. And she was coming up with specific information that there's no way she could have known by quote unquote normal means, right? There's no way science has currently identified that she could have been picking up this super specific information in many cases. And, once I started getting these results, I was thinking, I'm an actor and a bartender. I'm not the person who should be investigating one of the most important questions facing humanity, right? There should be people way smarter than me with much higher IQs looking into this stuff. And I wondered if there ever had been. And as it turns out, there have. The research has been immense. Going back over 100 years now, mediumship really came to the fore in America back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, back before everybody had a television and a radio, and people would get together and have seances once a week as a means of getting to, it was kind of a party thing they would do. And before long, things started to happen at these seances. And that's where mediumship began. And it caught the attention of some of our brightest scientists of the day. And I was shocked to discover that this research was out there, and that some of the smartest people to have ever walked the planet, some of them investigated it for decades, and came to the very clear conclusion that mediumship is a genuine phenomenon.
See, and I would have earlier when you were talking about that, I would have known about these things, and I would have said, well, why would you not know? And I would have said, what makes you think that they're not sitting next to you now? They're in different realms. So I always have those arguments because I've learned from October of 1903, where I would see the cards, she would put the cards down. After a while, you get to know what the cards is. And I always kept notes. I always recorded everything, and I only wanted to know 3 months in advance. I didn't know nothing after 90 days. And then when I couldn't sleep, I go back and listen to those tapes in order. And don't you know this? Not one thing was wrong. Going back to October of 1993, I could chart my progress of where I was going through. Should I do this? Why are these people not letting me do this? You know, she called it a why you, why not me syndrome, meaning, why does Brian get to have 7 million views a day and counting? How come I don't have that? And I tell my co-host to this day, there's a lot of people in the entertainment world, and you work in the entertainment world, they're envious, they're jealous, instead of being, rooting for your success, they can't wait for you to turn around and stab you in the back, unless you live in Los Angeles, that kind of thing like that. But, that's where I learned a lot of stuff back. And a lot of things is based on energy. And you get a feel of that after a while. There's a segment in there where when you're with your sister and you're sitting down and meeting her for the first time. Talk about that.
When we're meeting the medium for the first, so we had that medium call our house. That was the total stranger. And then a couple of days after that, my sister happened to hear a professional medium, someone who called herself a professional medium, on the radio. She was doing a morning show on a 95.7 here in the radio station here in Connecticut, where she was taking calls from listeners and giving them readings. So my sister hired her to come and do a reading for us at our house. And that's when I decided to test her. I talked to my dad. I was all by myself in my father's house, and he lived in a back lot in the woods in Guilford, Connecticut, really isolated lot. So I was completely alone. And I said, okay, Dad, I need you to have this medium, if this is real, deliver this very specific message for me. And as I was standing in the house, this memory suddenly flooded my mind. My parents got divorced when we were very young. So we'd spend the weekends with my dad, and we were very excited on Friday nights, my sister and I, and we couldn't get to sleep because we were excited to be there with my dad. So we would ask him to play with our hair at night to help us fall asleep. And the poor guy, for hours, we'd say, 5 more minutes, Dad, 5 more minutes. And until his hand was aching, he'd play with our hair. So this memory comes flooding back to me as I'm standing there for whatever reason. And I say, okay, that's it, Dad. I need this woman to mention my hair. If she doesn't mention my hair, it doesn't matter what else she says. I'm not going to believe this is real. You've got to get her to say that. So she comes to the house that night, does the reading, and everything she's saying is incredibly accurate. And I could not figure out what was going on. And it was so amazing that I actually forgot about my little experiment about the hair. I totally forgot, because within minutes, I was sure she was doing something I couldn't explain. That was the level of specificity of a lot of this information. So we're all weeping, right? Everyone in the living room is sobbing, saying, this is the most amazing thing that's ever happened to us. If this woman is a snake oil saleswoman, right? If she's a charlatan, she has done a remarkable job. Everyone is going to leave and tell all their friends about this, and she's going to get a ton of work out of it. You don't press your luck. If you're a professional, huckster, you don't press your luck. You know when to leave. But instead, with all of us there sobbing, we're like wrapping up. And in the middle of her sentence, we're like saying goodbye or something. And she stops and she looks right at me and says, your dad wants to talk about your hair. And it completely floored me. I couldn't breathe for a second. I felt like I'd been like punched. Like it took my breath away. And my mom and sister are saying, what's the matter? What's the matter? Because, I hadn't even told them. This was entirely between me and my dead father. And this woman came up with this code word. And so that's what really kicked me off into needing to get to the bottom of that. And then I found out that she was able to do this sort of thing under controlled conditions where I knew she could not be cheating.
That's incredible. But that was a great test, because that's a difficult one, especially where he lived and you only knew about the hair.
Yeah. And it's not like my hair is like completely average, short brown hair. You know what I mean? There's like nothing about my hair that a stranger would come in and be like, oh, there's got to be a story about this dude's, my hair is completely average in every way. So for me, and again, that was only one of the things. She said a ton of things that night that were very, very specific that I could not understand how she could know.
Did you guys record them at all?
No, we were taking no. I mean, now I have a ton that I've recorded and on camera, obviously, but that was our first sitting. So we were just taking meticulous notes, and you'll see, like in my notes, I have the page where I in big letters I say "my hair!" exclamation point, because I was so shocked. So yeah, that we just have recorded notes from.
That's still good though. I mean, because what I do is I always chart my progress and things, because going back to 1991, before I met her, I was working in home video. And till this day, I don't know how many movies I watched. I know I watched a lot. This is just when the VHS days are there. And so 1992, I started keeping track by hand. And I have written down in my notebooks, because I read everything by hand down till this day, every single movie that I've ever watched.
Oh, neat.
For example, it was 1,819 movies. I watched 707 movies short. That's during COVID. And I was like, wow, I felt 707 movies, 700 movies short. How did that happen? More than that. It's because I only saw 3 movies in the theater. So usually each month I should be seeing 26 movies. So what I was doing, she goes on my first reading, and I wasn't driving. It was really interesting. It took me 2.5 hours to get there. And she goes, and I wasn't driving when I was in Los Angeles at that point. I was like, oh, I took a train, bus, and something else. Oh yeah, someone finally picked me up and dropped me off there. And she goes, oh, you finally made it. The spirits didn't want you to come see me. I go, well, that makes a lot of sense, because I was having a hard time getting here. And then she lays out the cards from my name, starts at my name. And she goes, you got double S's. You got snakes in you, Sebastian, you got 2 S's in. See the S's? Those are snakes. You can get hissy with people. And then my mouth started to drop, because, wow, she's starting at my name, because we're not in charge of our name, but that would be a great deal. To this day, when I see people who have double S's or even an S in their name, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. So I understand kind of that feeling, what you were doing. And she's still my friend, and she still reads me, except I was spoiled for all these years. And then you'll get a kick out of this one. We were doing health and wealth workshops right up until December 11, 2019. Now, I knew the pandemic was coming, because I was told it was coming starting in May of 2018. That was the same month that I picked the Biden-Harris ticket. May of 2018, I picked that. I'm on record of saying this.
Wow.
3rd, 2018, we started sending out our first email, because I knew there was a pandemic coming. I just didn't know what the name of it was, and I didn't know the date that it was going to start. I knew we had about 1.5 years to get all of our stuff ahead of time, and we did. And I'm telling my co-hosts how, you got to be prepared, you got to do this, there's something big coming. How do you tell people, and you understand this now with your family, everything, how do you tell people that it's been channeled to your partner that there's a pandemic coming? Nothing's ever going to be the same. Brian, don't worry about not getting some interviews from movie theaters. There's not going to be movie theaters. I didn't question anything, because I knew. But the thing is, how do you tell people? So I started reaching out to Regal theaters. Where are they now? Right? Reaching out to Norwegian Cruises. This is all in 2018. What happened to them last year? This time last year, we were all locked down, weren't we? Except 2020 was my best year ever. You know why? Because I was prepared for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the stuff that you're talking about, there's so much evidence for it out there. And that's what gets me, that the average American is simply not aware that this stuff is out there, that the stuff that you are able to perceive is possible. But there is incredible evidence out there. There have been studies done for years, including studies done by the United States government, for instance, which I was surprised to find out that we've spent millions of dollars studying at the Stanford Research Institute. The CIA recently declassified these files, so anyone can go on the CIA website and read them. We've been using psychics in real world missions for years, since the 70s. Yep. So
hey, Nancy Reagan had one for Ronald.
She did. That's right.
Days.
That's right. Yeah. Just, the presidents, of course, they weren't going to know. People are afraid to talk about this stuff now, because the word parapsychology, it's like a dirty word, right? In the academic circles. If you are a scientist who is interested in this stuff, chances are you keep that on the down low, because it can be academic suicide if you go to your university and say, listen, I want to do a serious study into psychic phenomenon, psychic ability, ESP. You just can't do that, because unfortunately money has, like so many things, it poisons the way that our scientific research is done now. And so it's hard to get high level institutions studying this stuff.
Well, and that's the interesting thing. That's why Ancient Aliens does well, and that's why the universe on Netflix does well. I fall asleep to that series because it's calming for my brain because I'm doing so many things. But I'm looking at it at night because I won't watch horror movies after 9 anymore. Those days are over with. So I have to watch a documentary that calms my brain down, and it's usually Universe or Ancient Aliens because I can identify with all of that stuff. I wouldn't be where I am without her help. I would have been very angry and pissed off had I had not known this. I am so thankful. I thank the universe many times a day that I know what I know. And I'm for all the stuff. So, and I write everything down and date it, going back to when I first started doing movies.
Yeah.
So when she started reading my name, I had that recording for many, many years. I would go back and listen to it to see where my progress was. Because that's how where we're going in the world, for me, the world of entertainment, in my co-host. And then I go, when I give them information, I write it down and say, remember, I told you about this, remember? And I go, why would I give you wrong information? First of all, you're my friend. Second of all, I want you to succeed. So why would I give you wrong information that's being told to me? I'm just one of the messengers. And but no, there is no but. This is how it is.
Yeah. Like Ancient Aliens is an interesting example because, again, the mainstream scientific community looks at Ancient Aliens and thinks, phooey, that's just absurd. And yet the evidence for UFOs, UAPs, whatever the word is that we want to use, the evidence that something happening in our skies, in our oceans is really happening is immense. And in fact, in 2017, the New York Times broke the story that the Pentagon has videos that we have captured on the most high-tech camera equipment on the planet of objects doing things that we cannot understand. The Pentagon admits this now. And even so, it's still hard to talk about UFOs with a lot of people. A lot of people still think it's all nonsense, even though we have high level reporting and high level admissions and incredibly high level evidence being given to us that this is a real phenomenon. So we deal with some cognitive dissonance, for sure in your life that this is real because you've experienced it yourself. But there are people that you'll run into that it doesn't matter how sure you are or how great your evidence is. You're going to have a hard time getting through to them because walls, the brain is really good at putting up walls.
Well, I've gotten away with the saying this. I'm like, okay, you'll watch and see. I wrote it down and timestamped it. Let's see who's right. And I'm not. I said, I'm willing to put something down on this. Are you?
Yeah.
And
I mean, I've now gotten to the point where at first I was like, I really want to prove this to skeptics and debunkers. You know what I mean? I really want to prove it because I've now seen things with my own eyes. Like I want to prove it. Now I'm so secure in what I've seen and I have the knowledge myself. I don't have that need anymore. Because again, like I said, there are some people, there's a wall that's just not going to be penetrated. It doesn't matter. And my energy is better spent elsewhere. I'm totally happy to talk to skeptics and people who are in the middle of the road and not sure about it. I love sharing because most people just are not aware of the evidence that's out there. And that's sort of how I see my purpose now is to share this information with people who are at least open to these ideas. So that's where I am now.
So talk about where can you get this book?
The Amazon.com and my website is MikeAnthony.com. And on the website, I have some video clips as well of some of what we've been doing.
So this one I haven't read yet. I wanted to save this one because this one sounds very interesting. What about this one? How did this one come about?
Yeah. Life at a Hamilton was written. So I moved to New York to be an actor, like right after undergrad.
How's that working for you?
Really great. I took a job as a bartender, thinking I'd have it for a few months as my day job because I was sure that I was going to be a very famous actor. I was sure my career was going to completely, rocket into the stratosphere. And then 15 years later, I'm still bartending on Broadway, but I wouldn't have changed a thing because I've had some of the best experiences of my life doing this job. And particularly, yeah, I'm the bar manager for the Richard Rodgers Theater where Hamilton is. And to have been able to witness that from its very birth up till now has been just the ride of my life. Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote the musical, is an absolute genius, you know, which is a word we throw around a lot, genius. But that guy, his brain works in a way that the average brain simply doesn't. And to be able to have this perspective of it has been great. So the way the book came about is I was actually just sharing stories on Facebook about things I was watching, things I was seeing every day, sharing the stories for like my mom, basically thinking that just my family would be reading them. And they started to get shared and go a bit viral. And that's how the book came to be. Eventually people started asking to have the stories collected into a book format. And that's what Life at Hamilton is.
That's interesting. Um, that's intriguing. So, did you know you were going to write 2 books?
No, not at all. Both of the books kind of happened to me is how it feels. You know, Life at Hamilton, again, it came out of people asking for it. You know, a New York Times bestselling author happened to be following me on Facebook, a woman that I had never met. And one day I walked out of the theater on 46th Street in Midtown Manhattan and a car screeched to a halt and the door flew open and this woman came out and hugged me and she said, "Mike, I know you from Facebook." You know, and I'm like, and cars are honking. Her poor husband is in the driver's seat waiting, you know, for her. And she gets back in the car and drives off. And I think, oh, that was nice. And a couple of years later, I found out that she's a best-selling author and she wanted to take my stories to her publisher, to her agent. And that's how Life at Hamilton came to be. And then Love Dad, again, I ended up, I take part in the Netflix series Surviving Death, which is on Netflix now. And it was through that it was recommended that I write a book to fill in the gaps because the Netflix series kind of just scratches the surface of a lot of this stuff. So that book was written to give the full story. So yeah, both books felt like they kind of like the universe kind of made them happen.
I never asked this, but in your case, it's very intriguing. How did Love Dad, and then Life at Hamilton, how did they do? Because and when did they come out? Not the same time, right?
Like within months of each other.
That's
Within
challenging.
months.
How did you do that?
Oh, the only way it was possible was because of COVID. It's the only way because Broadway has been shut down since mid-March. So we're just at a year now. And I wrote both books over the course of a year, which is a process I would not recommend to anyone. I mean, it was a crazy thing to try to do. But it was simply circumstance that made it possible. And luckily, you know, both books are doing really well. Thank goodness. I mean, Hamilton, anything with the name Hamilton on it was probably going to do well, you know, because Hamilton is such a part of the culture. It's just in the zeitgeist right now. And then the other book is connected to the Netflix series. So thank goodness, knock on wood, both are doing well.
That's, you know, congratulations. I didn't see the one on Netflix yet because I wanted to wait and save it. I didn't want to see the movie. So usually I see the movie first and then I'll read the book if I have time. But I wanted to do yours different. My partner loved that. He hasn't read your book yet, but he knew I was going to interview you. And this is the one that where I talked to his mom because his mom channels through him. And it's very interesting.
Oh, great.
Like I said, that's and our movie tastes vary. Sometimes we hit, sometimes most of the time we're different things. I like more suspense thrillers, and I love your Love Dad book because I get it. This I know, Life at Hamilton, I know I'm gonna love this one because how could you not, for one? But it's you being there in a very unique situation. And it's not a coincidence that lady just happened to be driving by.
Yeah.
You can see these things now that she just, because she luckily she recognized you, but that could have been anybody.
Yeah.
I mean,
what are the chances? That was crazy.
I have these things happen all the time. Like I said, I'm still trying to figure out why 2 people said, God told me I needed to talk to you. I still don't understand that yet. I haven't gotten the real reason, but like I said, the first one, I've seen the things because the person that I ended up meeting through him her name is Edie Hand. She's Elvis Presley's cousin. She took me to Tennessee. This is, again, 2018, August 4th of 2018, we shot our shows. That show that I have with her is at 1,098,000 views.
Wow.
only in Tennessee, not on it's not on YouTube because that site goes up against YouTube. So within the next 2-3 days, it'll be at 1.1 million views and counting. The other show we did is at 1,000,001. It's 1.1 49,257 views now.
Wow.
I have 2 shows at 1.1 million views, not on YouTube. Does that make sense to you? This is the guy who said, God told me to stop and talk to you. This guy who introduced me to her.
What are those shows about?
Movies, movie reviews, and more, just like this.
Got it.
Come on, main screen, August 4th of 2018. This is where everything started to change. Remember, I was told what was going to happen in 2018.
Yeah.
We did them. We did 6 shows that day. Only 5 out of the 10 shows are up. However, out of Tennessee, we're at 4,150,000 views and still counting.
That's crazy.
We never go down. It never stays the same. The numbers are going up. Oh, wow. That's why I have different numbers. Tennessee numbers, my YouTube numbers. I put those numbers together. And then I have another set of numbers on a social media site that I've got 51,700 views. Just put those 3 numbers together. It's mind-boggling. I'm not even my Tuesday night live shows yet. Those numbers are coming in the next 2 weeks. So even if it's a minimum of 20,000 views for 4 months of shows, imagine what it's going to be when I start putting the weekly. Can you imagine? So my goal, and you'll get a kick, you can understand this. My goal was to have 10 million views between now and April 15th. I might have that. Actually, sorry, that was my old number. My original goal by April 15th of this year was to have 20 to 25 million views a day. I might come close to this when my numbers from iHeart and everything comes in from around the world.
That's congratulations, man. That's awesome.
Now, so remember, this stuff was told to me that it was going to happen. If you do these right things, you got to do the right things. You never put those wrong words out there. And again, it goes back to, you love Dad. That's why I enjoyed the book, because I get it. I understand that. And when I'm telling and talking to people, I want them to know these things like that. Listen to your messages. You were listening to Dad, right?
Definitely.
Imagine if you didn't, because these messages are always being told to us. It's just, are we paying attention?
I mean, the whole process, you're so right. Very similar. The dominoes that fell down felt like they were placed there and put into motion by something much greater than me. And it was by following those breadcrumbs that it felt like the universe was leaving that led to where I am. Yeah,
exactly. What are some of the little tidbits in here? Because I can't wait to open this Life with Hamilton that are in here.
It's mostly about just the daily experiences that I was having there in the lobby. The show affected people at such a deep level that it was just a remarkable thing to witness. There are some fun stories with the various celebrities that I've met. Getting to meet Barack Obama was one of the great highlights. That was a surreal experience. So there are some stories like that in there, but my favorites are just the daily encounters that I was having with people. The show, like one of my favorite stories, for instance, is about this young woman who came in and she was blind and her parents hadn't told her yet where they were going. It was going to be a surprise. So they're standing there in the lobby and they say, okay, do you know where we are? And she says, no, where? And they say, we're in Hamilton. And she immediately lost the control of her legs. She crumbled into her mother's arms and was sobbing. That's how excited she was to be at Hamilton. Wow. Yeah. And there are just a lot of stories like that. It was just a daily reminder about how special life can be if you're looking in the right places and looking at it in the right way. And it really opened up my eyes, because being a bartender was not my intended path, right? That was certainly not where I thought I was headed. But once I started,
look what you did, Ash, how you were explaining it, because you and I both get it. How it comes to the audience, they're listening to what I'm doing. Here's the thing. Everything is tied into everything. It's just a matter, are you paying attention? Because no matter what, we have free will.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
the thing. And again, it goes back to that's why I was interested for Love Dad. When your sister is sitting next to you, when you go to find that person was a psychic, or were they a medium, or were they a shaman? I wasn't sure on that. When you go find the office and it's not what you thought it was going to be.
Oh yeah, she was a medium. Yeah.
Okay, talk about that situation. That's interesting. Where you went to see her.
Yeah, mediumship, I thought must be a very rare thing. Once we found this person, I thought, well, anyone who can do this must be famous, right? They must be very successful if you can do this incredible thing. But then I came to find out that like there are a ton of people who claim the ability to do this. And this medium that we saw that probably gave us the best reading that I've ever had. We drove right past the place. Her office was in this like strip mall. I thought she must be at the top of a palace, right? If you can do this thing like the Oracle at Delphi, you have to go to the top of the mountain and then they're in this exalted place somewhere. But no, she was in this little strip mall, so nondescript that we drove past it like 3 times. So we finally get the parking lot, and there aren't like signs up on the place. There are like multiple businesses in the strip mall that don't have signs on them. And there's a woman standing outside and she's smoking a cigarette. And we're like, excuse me, do you know where Readings by Robin is? And she's like, yeah. Are you here for an appointment? We're like, yeah. And she said, okay, it's right in there. Just take a seat right down the hall. And then she said, I'll be right in. And I was like, oh, are you Robin? Because in my mind at that point, again, I'm thinking anyone who is this connected to spirit must look a certain way. I wasn't sure what that way was, but I did not expect them to be like in an oversized sweatshirt outside smoking a cigarette. That wasn't my vision of a medium for some reason. And as it turned out, that woman, Robin, is a phenomenal medium. And she gave us a reading that was astounding. I tell the story in detail in the book about what the things that she said.
No, it was incredible because it made me laugh because you ever heard of the Roosevelt Hotel in Culver City, California, where the Munchkins lived for when they were filming The Wizard of Oz? That's
no.
To go meet my shaman. And
oh, interesting.
She's in a hotel? Or we just met in a hotel? No, she was living in a hotel at that point. That was just where she was. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this is interesting.
Yeah.
And I go up there, I'm like, wow, this is a strange hotel. Oh yeah, the Munchkins lived during the Wizard of Oz during the shooting because Culver City, so it's right there down the street. I'm like, this is interesting. So I was confused. So I can imagine what you guys were and then I get there, oh yes, this is what Brian Sebastian need. And oh yes, you. And this is when I found out I was supposed to be aborted also. Imagine that was the second thing out of her mouth. And she goes, yeah, your mom had you when she was 16. She was a year off. My mom had me when I was 15. My mom never.
Wow.
I was hit with those 2 things. Very, very first. And then she goes, you're a late bloomer. You were never supposed to have any success before this. You're a late bloomer. And I'm like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. I'm okay with that. So I tell people you weren't supposed to have certain things that in your 20s. Sometimes they come later on. So I fall into that Morgan Freeman, Samuel Jackson realm of things. And I'm happy with that. Now, had I not been ever told that, I'd be an angry Black person. We're absolutely married with 2 kids and, divorced 2 or 3 times. Absolutely. But since she, that made me look at things differently. So I thank Joya daily. And she's seen my progress of where I've gone. And I couldn't have gotten here by my, definitely. And again, that's why I can never say so much about your book, because I get it. I totally get it. And I'm telling my friends, I'm telling my co-hosts, one of my co-hosts, I said, 2019 January, don't you go to Denver. Don't go to Denver with this guy. Oh, I'm not going to. Mike, she's in Denver. She's lost her voice. She's lost her show. She's not the same person, and she's trapped in Denver. What did Denver have last week? What, 26 inches of snow? She didn't like.
Yeah.
I warned her a year in advance.
So when did these psychic abilities start opening up for you?
Well, I started listening. I started paying attention. I started writing everything down, and I used it as a guideline. And
after meeting with this shaman, that's when you started to do that?
Yeah. Oh. And then I would going back for cleansings and clearings of blockages. I had things that weren't being completed. I would start
Mm.
here and I would have a block, and how come this is not going through? How come I can't get this? So she would describe what was being blocked from past lives. And again,
Yeah.
it goes back to another thing. We live many lives, whether people believe it or not. And I tell them, what, you see all those stars in there? So what, you think we're the only one? That's just what you can see. And then there's other things that you can't see. And then I go, because of our thinking, you don't even believe what I'm telling you. Why does someone else from outside the universe want to come and talk to you? I literally tell them like that to make them understand that there's different realms, there's different parallels. You ever seen Twilight Zone? Well, look at how that's shot.
Yeah.
Look what happened with Star Trek. We're using some of that technology. You think Gene Roddenberry just wrought this out of no place? No, this stuff was beamed to him. That's why you have the Trekkie fans. That's why you have the Star Wars fans. We understand the stuff is there.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of this whole thing was the discovery of the evidence for reincarnation. There is amazing evidence pointing to the direction, pointing to the idea that this is real. The University of Virginia has been studying this stuff for over 50 years at the Division of Perceptual Studies, a guy named Dr. Ian Stevenson. And the evidence is overwhelming. And it's so powerful, in fact, that JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, right, which is one of the most respected scientific journals in the world, when JAMA tells us that they've done a new study and it looks like eggs are not as bad for us as we thought they were. You can have 2 eggs a day and it's okay. It's splashed across the headlines, right? It's all over the place. It's on the nightly news. Eggs are not as bad as we thought. When the editor for JAMA, the book editor for JAMA, read Dr. Ian Stevenson's work, he came to the conclusion that reincarnation was the most likely explanation. The book editor for JAMA said that, and no one heard about it. It barely went anywhere. It cracked no headlines, even though the evidence is that strong that the JAMA book editor wrote that. And I went down to the University of Virginia to speak with Dr. Jim Tucker, who now heads up the Division of Perceptual Studies. And I was astounded to find that, to him, there's no question about this. Reincarnation actually happens, and there is very, very solid evidence that says so.
Well, in 1994, remember October 1993, I met Joy Delaney, my shaman, who I still have to this day. That's a long time ago. 1994, I met this lady from New Zealand, Margaret Birkin, and her husband said, she goes, Brian, my husband does past life regression. I'm like, really? What's that? And he's going to lay you down and you're going to be able to see your past lives. So I'm like, really? Okay, I want to try this because does it hurt? All right, let's see. So I did it. And then so you're in the state, and I'll never forget it. I saw 4 lives. I saw me being young, and I'm just looking down. I'm like, I'm looking down. And then as it's like a shot, it widens out, and I'm like, oh, I'm in a jail. Oh, and then I'm an Indian. And then this group is praying to me. And I realized it was my best friend who took me for my first reading in 1987 when I moved to California. And it was my she's always claimed to be an Indian. I go, wow, this is weird. I'm in a jail and I'm actually hung and I'm looking down at her. And then the next one was, I was whipping this girl. I was white and she's on a tree. And I just know I was in Louisiana and I was a plantation owner. And because she did something wrong. I go, I've said these 2 things so far. No wonder I've had problems getting things like that. Because, you have past lives. You either did good things in the past life or you did a lot of bad things and it still leads to your next life. And I understand that point. And then one thing, I've never had any illnesses or anything like this, but I've always had a problem with my left knee. I saw me in World War I, not 2, World War I, and I'm running and a tank runs over my left knee. And I just remember 1980, I was skating in high school and I just fell. And I was a great skater. Nobody tripped me, nothing, just my knee buckled. And it was never the same. I never went to the doctor or anything like that. So when I saw that, I'm like, oh, that's why I've got a bad left knee. It was run over by a tank in World War I. Wow. So when I saw those And he was just like Dearest's guide. Brian, what are you seeing? Because he could see what I was describing to him, but he was not saying anything. He would say, well, who's this person? Do you see this person? There was always someone dressed in black. She didn't say anything. She was just there. She was one of my guides. To this day, I don't know who she was, but she was seeing, just observing. And I go, I asked him, who's this woman? He goes, she's one of your guides. I'm like, oh, she's all just dressed in black. She doesn't say anything. No, she's not supposed to. She's just monitoring what you're doing. I go, that's interesting. That was my first past life regression.
Wow.
I haven't gone back since, but I want to. But once you've had those great experiences like that, you want to have the best.
Yeah, that whole thing fascinates me. The past life regression thing.
Actually, the thing about that, Mike, is I saw them. I was not asleep. I was awake.
Yeah.
Eyes were closed as I was laying down, like I was having a massage. And I could see it like a moving picture. That's what was trippy about it. I didn't know he could do it.
Yeah. That's amazing. I started to look in. So the reincarnation evidence at the University of Virginia comes from little kids who have spontaneous memories of past lives, and then they can verify. So the little kid says, I lived in Germany in 1810 on Smith Street. And my daughter's name was, Bethany or whatever. And then they end up finding a previous person and they find out that everything that kid said was correct. So that evidence is amazing. And now hypnosis as a way to get to these memories is also interesting to me. I had a friend of mine, one of my best friends, her name is Marie. I had her undergo this process and we filmed it. And it was interesting because Marie never knew anything about this stuff. She was not into the idea of past lives or anything like that. And she remembered previous lives under hypnosis, and we filmed the whole thing. I have a clip on my website of this process, and it totally changed Marie's life, because she had this really incredible realization during this previous life. She saw herself being murdered in one of them by her husband, who had choked her to death. Anyway, she ended up having this incredible realization, and now she goes through this life knowing without a doubt that she has lived before. Yeah. So I really think it's a fascinating question that I wish we could devote more research to, because one of the questions they look at the University of Virginia that's interesting is, how do these memories maybe affect us on a subconscious level? Because these kids have these memories, right? And that's a small percentage of people have these memories, but possibly it would make sense that all of us have these memories, just most of us don't remember them, right? And how are they affecting us on a subconscious level? That's a fascinating question. And so, for instance, we have twins, right? Twins are born, they're identical in every way. Their DNA is exactly the same. They grow up in the same house, so their environment is the same. And yet they're very, very different people often, right? What causes those differences? Is it possible that their previous lives are subconsciously affecting them, and that is responsible for some of the differences between them? So anyway, and another, to go along also with what you said about your leg getting run over, one of the really interesting things is that sometimes people will have an issue in this life. For instance, there's a guy who was having pain in his side, right? He went to every specialist he could. They could not identify what the problem was. There was nothing physical they could find. Finally, a doctor said, maybe you need a psychiatrist. Maybe this is a psychological thing. And he ended up getting regressed. And he was like a Roman soldier or something who died by getting a spear in his side.
Absolutely.
Just having that memory for some reason resolved the pain in this life. Once he went through that process, he no longer had the pain. Just having the recollection resolved the issue. So yeah, it's a fascinating area of study.
Well, and again, that's why I'm thankful for what I know. And I tell people, and I'm on record for everything. If I say something's going to happen, it's going to happen. It's not coming from me. I'm just one of them, let's say thousands of messengers, but I have that platform of what, and I was told I was a late bloomer that these things were going to happen. So I'm a Libra. I'm a patient guy, but just when you think you're patient, you're like, okay, I've been patient for 10 years. When is this going to happen? Because as you know, and you wrote 2 books, then with this whole thing being locked down, you had no idea you're going to do it. And the one I read is fascinating. I really I can't stop talking about it, but it's one of those things where had you had known what was going to do it and you weren't going to be locked down, you wouldn't have been able to do those stories. You wouldn't have had this woman jump out of a car and hung you. You wouldn't have been there. You wouldn't have heard messages from your dad, which is why you have the title Love Dad. How Joy and I told me did, I was a late bloomer. I would have been angry. I would have been,
Yeah.
what pandemic, what? Because my number one love is going to the movies. So when she said the movie business is going to change, and this is in 2019, because I got it written down and I dated it, and I read the notes, I'm like, oh God, I can't go to the movies. I can't have my popcorns because guess what? Theaters are just starting to open, but guess what? There weren't any new movies coming until Memorial Day weekend, the earliest. But again, I'm not going back to the movies until the ventilation system is correct because I know what happens in the dark. I was told this. So
Yeah.
Movie whore, do you think I'm going to the movies? No, because I know it's not ready yet. And again, I was told this at a certain date and I wrote it down and I go, yeah, I can't go to the movies yet. Okay.
Man, I'm going to start following you and keeping up now with your predictions. I mean, you're an important contact in my life now.
Well, here's the thing. I got to have you on our show in July. If I could get you on earlier, because we're booked so far ahead, I got to introduce you to the other girls because they're gonna love your stories of this.
I'd love to.
That would be fun. So give
anytime
links real quick, Mike, and then we'll end this.
It's all at mikeanthony.com, and the books are available on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com.
And as I always say, and it goes right really to this, if you see someone out of smile, please give them one of yours because the world needs it. I'm Brian Sebastian. This is Movie Reviews and More, and we will see you next week.